Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marcus Stalin, and you just tuned into History with Marcus. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the words government or deja vu or any fancy words in the English dictionary, they all come from a different language than English. They come from French. But I know the question on all your minds. How did French get in English? Well, it happened because of one battle in Hastings. The Battle of Hastings. So let's get started. Now, to understand this, we need to go into Anglo-Saxon England. You see, early England was plagued with lots of division. Everybody was a different state. And there was one important state here for our video today, Wessex. You see, during Viking raids, one man, Alfred the Great, would make Wessex a huge empire, England. That is how the Anglo-Saxons came to be, from Wessex, a small little state. Now, with that, the Anglo-Saxons would rule for a very long period of time, but something would stop them. To understand that, let's go to Normandy. You see, once the Vikings decided to attack France. Now, when they attacked, the French obviously beat them. They easily beat them. But the French knew something. Other Vikings would come, and those Vikings would easily beat the French. And they had an idea. They'd give these Vikings their own plot of land in Normandy, the Kingdom of Normandy, and they would protect the French from other coming Vikings. Now, this actually worked. This formed the Kingdom of Normandy. Now, why is this important to our story? Well, you see, one time the Vikings came in and took England. And one of the princes of England during the time, his name was Edward. Him and his brother ran over to Normandy. When they came back, they tried to regain that throne, but the Earl of Wessex blinded Edward's brother with a red-hot poker. Thus, he couldn't be king. This Earl of Wessex was Godwinson. Now, Edward ran back over, but soon no more Viking heirs for England were found. This culminated in Edward being called back to England to become king. Now, when Edward was like this, you need to understand something about medieval Europe. There was a 50-50 during the time. Either people liked you or people didn't like you. And Edward wanted everybody to like him. But there was this other person everybody liked. Now, who was this person? Because Edward knew something. If he can become friends with that person, he could get the popularity of the English people. And that person was, guess who? Godwinson, the Earl of Wessex. The very same person who blinded his brother with a red-hot poker. Now, it turns out Edward had already exiled Godwinson. So he called Godwinson back and married Godwinson's daughter. Now, Godwinson had many other children. One of these children also became Earl of Wessex. Now, this king wanted to become the next king after Edward, even though he technically wasn't Edward's son. Fun fact, Edward never really had a child. Now, maybe just because he didn't like his wife being the daughter of the person who he hated the most. But when Edward finally passed away, chaos came to England. You see, first of all, there were many claimants to the English throne. First of all, Godwinson's son. Now, the thing is, he wasn't technically the real heir because Edward did have a nephew. But nobody really minded about the nephew because Godwinson's son shone all the light on him. Now, one more claimant was William of Normandy. You see, back when Edward was in Normandy, he had befriended the Prince of Normandy, William. Now, William wanted England, so he claimed he had a claim to the throne. And one last person was the King of Norway. Now, the King of Norway had fought everywhere. He had fought in Poland, he had fought in Estonia, he had fought with pirates, and he wanted his last days to be in England. He wanted one final campaign to rid the English Anglo-Saxons and make himself the king. Now you might ask, what was his claim to the throne? Well, not really as strong as everybody else's. You see, his claim was that back when the Vikings controlled, Norwegian kings said that the next Norwegian king would become the King of England, which was no longer the fact because Anglo-Saxons ruled England now. But he still wanted it. So he went over and landed in York with his wife and his brother. When he landed there, the Earls of York did not want to go down and surrender to him. So they stayed in and fought, and they lost because the King of Norway kept burning all the cities until everybody submitted to him. Now, because Edward had promised to William of Normandy that he could be the next king after he passes away, which clearly made one conflict. Now, Godwinson did not really mind and took the claim of throne of England, of King of England. Now here's a little problem. William had heard about this, who by the way, William was now King of Normandy, and he had remembered that Godwinson's son had sworn on holy relics that he would not claim the throne of England. Now, you see, this might have just been that William was holding Godwinson's son's family as hostage. Now, while this was happening, Godwinson's son realized that the King of Norway being in York itself was a very big problem. So he sent his army up there, all the way up north, and fought at the famous Battle of Stamford Bridge. You see, why is it called Stamford Bridge? Because you see, you need to understand the terrain. There were two pieces of land, and between them was a river, and in between that river was Stamford Bridge. You see, there one Viking went ahead with an axe and kept halting the movement of the Anglo-Saxons. Now this is most likely not true, but finally once he was dealt with, the Anglo-Saxons went in, and because the Vikings weren't suspecting this, that chainmail was off. So finally, the King of Norway and all the Vikings would die in that battle, and the King of Norway would run. The King of Norway's brother and wife would run back to Norway, where now Godwinson's son was only one of the two claimants to the throne, but there was still William. William had already had a fleet to go over up into England. Now here's a little problem. The wind wasn't going with him. William already had hopped on a boat, but it crashed back in Normandy. So finally, after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the wind turned the tides, and William sent his whole fleet up into England. Now he was attacking from the south of England, while Godwinson's son was in the north, right after one huge battle. So now he had to go all the way down south. Now he had just gone over to London, Godwinson's son. He didn't really think William was that much of a threat, so he didn't move from London. But this was a huge underestimation, because due to this, William would begin to burn the English countryside, and then only Godwinson's son realized this was a real problem. So he went down south, and finally the Battle of Hastings happened between Normandy, William, and Anglo-Saxons, Godwinson's son. And in the battle, it actually seemed like Godwinson and the Anglo-Saxons would win, because they clearly had more troops than William, and they also had the high ground, and all the evidence proved that they would win. Now, but this would not be true, because as William's cavalry and other forces advanced, they couldn't really move forward because of the shield wall that had been made under Godwinson's son. Now you see, but William had come up with a plan. The plan that If his cavalry would lure them into the low ground, then they could encircle them and deal with them and chip them off bit by bit. And this was actually a smart plan, because the cavalry would lure all of them down to the low ground, and all of Godwinson's son's troops actually believed that and thought they were winning. So they broke seal formation and went down to fight. But this was all part of William's trap. William quickly encircled the troops and dealt with them. He then moved up and attacked. Immediately all the lines broke and chaos ensued. It was hand-to-hand fighting now. And a rumor had come across the Anglo-Saxon camp that now Godwinson's son was killed. But that's not true. But because of this, the entire chaos finally broke, and the Anglo-Saxons were now chipped bit by bit. Finally, William encircled all of them and began to win. Then, only then, Godwinson's son was killed by an arrow to the head. Finally, after this, all of South England would fall to William. William had a new name now, William the Conqueror. Now, it would take lots of time for him to conquer all of England, but when he finally did, he merged the French language and the Anglo-Saxon language, adding fancy words, because right now the Normans were ruling. So they made words like government, crown, and fancy other words like deja vu. While Anglo-Saxon would enter a room, a Norman would enter a chamber. An Anglo-Saxon could buy a dress, but a Norman would buy a blouse. And with this, this would change the English language forever and change human history forever. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the Battle of Hastings.